Everything shifted on a quiet Sunday afternoon while I was placing silver forks on cloth napkins. My daughter Jessica stood leaning against the dining room archway, her smartphone pointed directly at me. At first, I assumed she was capturing the roasted chicken and vegetables I had spent the last 2 hours preparing for our traditional family dinner. Then she let out a sharp chuckle. "Our live-in maid," she announced to her phone's camera. At least she's good for something. I froze the serving spoon hovering over the mashed potatoes. She didn't notice my reaction, too busy tapping her screen to upload the clip to her social media feed. Jessica and her husband Greg had moved into my home 10 months ago under the pretense of saving for a down payment on their own place. Since my husband passed away 3 years ago, the house had felt slightly empty, and I had genuinely wanted to help them get a head start. But over the months, their gratitude had evaporated, replaced by a cold expectation that I would handle the cooking, cleaning, and utility bills. Curious and carrying a heavy knot in my stomach, I walked into the kitchen and opened the app on my tablet. There it was. The video was already gaining views, carrying that exact humiliating caption. But what truly made my chest tighten was the first comment beneath it. Greg had left a simple, mocking, laughing emoji. He was sitting upstairs playing video games while I prepared his dinner, finding it hilarious that his mother-in-law was being treated like unpaid help. I didn't yell. I didn't march upstairs and demand an apology. Arguing with Jessica always led to circles of denial and accusations of me being overly sensitive. Instead, I quietly set the serving spoon down on the granite counter. I walked into my bedroom, grabbed a small overnight tote, and packed enough clothes for one night. Without saying a single word to either of them, I walked out the front door, started my car, and drove to a small, quiet motel on the edge of town. I needed space to think, but more importantly, I needed them to realize my absence. The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the cheap motel blinds when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text message from Jessica. "Why's my card declined?" The cashier at the organic market is looking at me like I'm crazy. I sat up, poured myself a cup of the room's mediocre coffee, and smiled. I didn't hesitate. Before I had even gone to sleep the previous night, I had logged into my banking app and permanently canceled the supplementary debit card I had given Jessica months ago for shared household groceries. Over time, that card had morphed into her personal fund for premium gym supplements, expensive cosmetics, and whatever else caught her eye. I took my time getting dressed and checking out. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, it was past noon. Jessica and Greg were both sitting in the living room, their arms crossed, radiating frustration. "Where have you been?" Jessica demanded, standing up immediately. "And why did the bank shut off my grocery card? I was totally humiliated this morning." I set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door and looked at her calmly. "I canceled the card, Jessica. It wasn't the bank." Greg scoffed, shaking his head. "Over what? Because you got mad, we didn't eat dinner with you last night. You just disappeared." "I left because I saw the video." I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "If you both view me as a live-in maid, then I suppose it is time I resign from the position. Maids get paid. They don't fund their employers' lifestyles." Jessica rolled her eyes, crossing her arms tighter. "Oh my gosh, Mom. It was literally just a joke for my followers. You're taking it way out of proportion. Jokes have consequences." I countered, stepping closer and holding out my hand. "I'll take the canceled card back, please. If you want to be treated like independent adults, you can start purchasing your own food with your own money." She threw the plastic card onto the coffee table, muttering under her breath. They thought this was just a temporary phase. But I was only just getting started. Monday morning arrived, bringing with it the usual chaotic rush that Jessica and Greg created before heading to work. Typically, this was my cue to start the coffee maker pack their leftover containers for lunch, and move their laundry from the washer to the dryer so nothing wrinkled. Today, I stayed in my bedroom until I heard the shower turn on upstairs. When I finally walked down to the kitchen, I made exactly 1 cup of coffee and cracked 2 eggs into a small skillet. I sat at the island, enjoying the quiet morning light. A few minutes later, Greg came stomping down the stairs, frantically tying his necktie. "Wanda, where is my blue button-down?" he asked, pulling open the laundry room door. "It's not in the dryer. It's exactly where you left it on Saturday," I answered, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "In the hamper." Greg stared at me, his face turning a blotchy red. "I have a huge presentation today. I need that shirt." "The washing machine works perfectly," I pointed out gently. "You have hands. I suggest you pick a different shirt for today and learn the quick wash cycle for tomorrow." Jessica hurried into the kitchen next her gym bag slung over one shoulder. She pulled open the refrigerator, expecting her usual pre-made protein smoothie. Finding only raw ingredients, she slammed the door shut. "Mom, seriously, I don't have time to blend this right now. My spin class starts in 20 minutes. Then you better hurry." I smiled, washing my single breakfast plate and setting it on the drying rack. I dried my hands on a towel and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them both standing there in stunned silence. I refused to absorb their panic. Their poor time management was no longer my emergency. For 10 months, I had functioned as the shock absorber for their lives, smoothing out every wrinkle and preparing every meal. That service was now permanently discontinued. The house was finally feeling like mine again, and it was time it looked like it too. As the week progressed, the reality of my new boundaries began to set in, but they were stubbornly clinging to their bad habits. I spent my Wednesday afternoon observing the first floor of my house. When they moved in, they were supposed to keep their belongings confined to the upstairs guest suite. Slowly, insidiously, their lives had bled into my space. Greg's heavy work boots and discarded mail cluttered the entryway console. Jessica's fitness magazines, yoga mats, and an assortment of empty water bottles covered my glass coffee table. The corner of the living room, which used to house my favorite floral reading chair by the large bay window, was now occupied by Greg's massive, ugly gaming monitor and tangled cords. I went to the garage and retrieved 3 large plastic storage bins. Systematically, I walked through the living room, kitchen, and hallway, placing every single item that did not belong to me into the bins. I didn't fold anything or organize it carefully. I simply gathered their boots, magazines, cables, and jackets and carried the heavy bins up the stairs, stacking them directly in front of their bedroom door. Next, I unplugged Greg's gaming setup, carefully wrapping the cords, and placed the heavy monitor on the floor next to the bins. I slid my floral reading chair back to its rightful place by the window, adjusting the floor lamp beside it. I sat down with a good book and breathed in the scent of my clean, uncluttered living room. When Jessica came home, I heard the loud clatter as she tripped over a bin upstairs. She marched down to the landing, her face flushed with anger. "Mom, did you just dump all our stuff in the hallway?" "I gathered your belongings that were scattered across my living room," I replied, without looking up from my book. "Please keep your things upstairs from now on. I like my home tidy," she huffed, stomping back up the stairs. She absolutely hated the change, but I knew she couldn't argue. The real test of their entitlement, however, was about to hit their upcoming summer schedule. By Friday evening, the atmosphere in the house was icy. Jessica and Greg were eating takeout pizza on the couch, leaving the boxes open on my freshly cleaned coffee table. I walked in, picked up the greasy boxes, and placed them directly onto Greg's lap. He glared at me, but didn't say a word. Jessica cleared her throat. "So Greg and I were looking at flights for our beach trip to Florida next month. Since you usually cover the airfare for family vacations, I can just send you the booking link to pay, right?" I looked at her, genuinely amazed by the audacity. "I won't be paying for your flights, Jessica, or your hotel. You are saving for a house. Remember? Vacations are a luxury you can fund yourselves. You're kidding, she snapped. You always help with the summer trip. Things change, I said, simply turning on my heel and walking into my home office. The next morning, I hired Bob, a local handyman who had done work for my late husband. I had him install heavy-duty digital keypad locks on 2 doors, my master bedroom and my home office. Recently, I had noticed items shifting on my dresser and my favorite expensive moisturizer slowly emptying. Jessica had always believed that what was mine was hers. When Bob finished the installation, the loud beeps of the keypad echoed in the hallway. Jessica poked her head out of her room. Are you seriously putting a lock on your door inside your own house? Why are you acting so paranoid? I typed in my new 4-digit code, the lock clicking open with a satisfying sound. I am not paranoid, Jessica. I am protecting my peace and my privacy. Please do not ask for the code because I will not give it to you. I stepped inside and shut the solid wood door behind me. The physical barrier felt incredibly liberating. I had reclaimed my time, my money, and my personal space. But I knew there was still one massive area of the house they had completely taken over. Saturday morning broke clear and bright, the perfect day for heavy lifting. For nearly a year, my reliable sedan had been parked in the driveway, exposed to the blistering summer sun and winter snow. The reason was simple. My 2-car garage was packed to the ceiling with Jessica and Greg's overflow. They had brought boxes of old college textbooks, a broken futon, unused sporting equipment, and a massive set of weights Greg swore he would use, but never did. It was a chaotic mountain of junk that they refused to sort through. I had asked them nicely at least a dozen times to clear a space for my car. They always promised they would get to it next weekend. I didn't ask again. I put on my gardening gloves and spent 4 grueling hours dragging, pushing, and sliding every single box and piece of furniture out of the garage. I moved it all to the covered concrete patio in the backyard. The patio roof would keep it dry, but it was completely out of my way. Once the concrete floor of the garage was finally swept clean, I grabbed my keys, started my car, and pulled it smoothly into its rightful indoor space. The automated door rattled shut, sealing my victory. Greg pulled into the driveway a few hours later. I watched through the kitchen window as he realized the garage was occupied. He marched into the house, his face stormy. Wanda, where is all my stuff? Did you throw it away? It is stacked neatly under the patio awning, I answered, wiping down the countertops. You can't just move my weights. What if they get rusty from the humidity? He shouted, finally dropping his passive-aggressive act. I looked him dead in the eye. Then you should probably move them upstairs to your bedroom. My garage is for my car. I will no longer sacrifice my comfort for your convenience. He opened his mouth to argue, but the absolute finality in my tone stopped him cold. They were realizing that they had no power here. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife, and they decided to retaliate the only way they knew how, through petty inconvenience. On Tuesday morning, I went to the kitchen to get cream for my coffee, only to find the large refrigerator almost entirely empty. My milk, my fresh vegetables, my sliced turkey, all of it was gone. In their place was a single, brightly colored sticky note stuck to the inside of the door. Since we have to buy our own food now, we want separate groceries. Don't touch our stuff. They had packed all their newly purchased groceries into the crisper drawers and had spitefully moved all of my items onto the bottom shelf of the pantry, where perishables would surely spoil. Rather than throwing a fit, I quietly threw away my ruined food. I drove to the local appliance store and purchased a sleek, medium-sized mini fridge. I had the delivery men bring it straight into my locked home office. I then went to the premium grocery store, stocked up on all my favorite artisan cheeses, fresh fruits, and high-quality meats, and packed them safely away behind my keypad lock. For the next 3 days, I ignored the main kitchen refrigerator entirely. I prepped small, simple meals in my office and used the microwave. By Friday, Jessica was hovering in the kitchen staring into their mostly barren fridge. They hadn't bought enough food for the week, clearly expecting me to crack and fill the main shelves with my usual bulk purchases so they could scavenge. Mom, Jessica asked, eyeing my hands as I walked through the kitchen with a perfectly toasted artisan bagel. "Are you eating out every day?" "There's nothing in the main fridge. I accepted your note." I smiled politely. "You wanted separate food, so I am keeping mine completely separate. I hope you enjoy doing your own grocery shopping." They thought they could run the house through small rebellions, but their lack of foresight was their own undoing. The biggest surprise arrived on a rainy Friday evening. I was reading in my living room when the front door burst open. Jessica walked in, shaking out her umbrella, followed closely by Greg and 2 older people I immediately recognized. It was Greg's parents, Arthur and Linda. "Hi, Mom," Jessica called out, projecting a fake, cheerful volume. Arthur and Linda drove down for the weekend. I told them they could crash here. I closed my book slowly. She hadn't asked me. She hadn't even hinted at visitors. She was boldly attempting to assert dominance over the house by playing the generous host. We brought wine. Wanda Linda smiled warmly, unaware of the battlefield she had just walked into. Jessica said the guest room is all ready for us. Jessica confidently grabbed Linda's suitcase and led her down the hallway toward the first-floor guest bedroom. She grabbed the handle and twisted. It didn't budge. She rattled it, her fake smile slipping. "Mom, why is this locked?" I stood up, smoothing my cardigan. "Because it is no longer a guest room. I converted it into my personal sewing and craft room last week. It holds expensive equipment, so I keep it locked." Jessica's face turned pale. "But where are Greg's parents going to sleep? I assume they will be staying in your private living area, upstairs." I addressed Jessica directly before turning to Arthur and Linda with a polite smile. "I apologize for the confusion. Jessica didn't inform me she was inviting company, or I would have warned her to buy an air mattress. You are welcome to stay. But the first floor is my private residence." The awkward silence was deafening. Greg dragged his parents' heavy suitcases up the narrow stairs while Jessica quietly apologized to them. They spent the entire weekend crammed into Jessica's upstairs area, sleeping on a thin camping mattress. It was profoundly uncomfortable for everyone, but it finally forced them to understand a harsh reality. They could not make decisions about a house they did not own. The moment Greg's parents pulled out of the driveway on Sunday afternoon, the house fell into a heavy, defeated silence. Jessica and Greg came downstairs to the kitchen, both looking exhausted and miserable. They had spent 2 days trying to play host in a space they had zero control over, and the illusion they had maintained for their in-laws was shattered. I was sitting at the dining room table, the exact spot where Jessica had filmed me weeks ago. In front of me was a manila envelope. "Have a seat, both of you," I said calmly. They exchanged a wary glance but sat down opposite me. I slid the envelope across the polished wood. Greg opened it cautiously, pulling out 3 stapled pages. His eyes scanned the document, widening slightly. "This is a month-to-month residential lease agreement," I explained, my voice leaving no room for debate. "If you wish to continue living in the upstairs suite of my home, you will begin paying fair market rent, along with 1/3 of the household utilities starting on the 1st of next month." Jessica stared at the paper. "Rent, Mom. We're trying to save for a house. You've been living here rent-free for almost a year," I reminded her gently but firmly. "Your grocery card proved you are spending your savings on luxuries, not a down payment. I am no longer funding your lifestyle. And if we don't sign it?" Greg asked, his voice tight with defensive anger. Then consider this your formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. I replied, looking directly at him. It is not a punishment. It is simply a boundary. You are adults, and it is time you pay your own way. I stood up, leaving the document on the table, and walked out to tend to my garden. The reality of adulting was finally crashing down on them, and I wasn't going to offer a safety net. 2 days later, I found the lease agreement sitting on the kitchen island. It was signed in blue ink by both of them. Next to it was a check for the first month's rent and a smaller check covering their portion of the water and electric bills. I didn't gloat, and they didn't apologize out loud. But a profound shift occurred in the house. The realization that they were no longer entitled children, but actual tenants on a ticking clock changed everything. They started buying their own generic brand groceries. The loud stomping up and down the stairs ceased. Greg finally learned how to use the washing machine without ruining his shirts, and Jessica stopped leaving her gym equipment scattered across my living room. They respected my locked doors, and they treated me with the basic courtesy one might show a landlord. But beneath the surface, they realized they couldn't afford their extravagant lifestyle while actually paying rent. 4 months later, Greg walked into the kitchen as I was making my morning coffee. "We found an apartment," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "It's small, but it's close to Jessica's work. We'll be out by the end of the month." "I think that is a wonderful step for you both," I replied sincerely. Moving day was swift. They packed their belongings into a rented truck, finally clearing the last of their junk from my patio. As Jessica handed me her house key, she looked down. "Thanks, Mom, for letting us stay." It wasn't an apology for the video, but it was an acknowledgement of reality. That evening, I locked the front door, walked into my living room, and sat in my favorite floral chair by the window. The house was silent, clean, and entirely mine. I sipped my tea, breathing in the deep, peaceful air of a life finally under my own control.